What's up, y'all? It's Turnip, and I'm back. Y'all have been so patient and waited for Daddy to return, but I've got a surprise for you. My ranking for all the units in the game. I'm going to go over everything you need to know about them, and yeah, their usefulness. So stick around and enjoy the video.
Spartans on deck.
Marines, the frontline infantry unit of the UNSC, fall right in the mid-tier. Overall, the Marine squads have a very limited usefulness, including taking over the garrisons, getting the bonus reactors, or the resource elevators. On smaller maps, they do a lot better just because they can get around a lot easier and they're not hindered by their slow movement speed. They scored a little bit higher for me on the 1v1 and 2v2 tier list just because those maps are smaller and they can move around a lot easier on those maps. Also, those smaller maps tend to have more hooks, which are the reactors and resource buildings, etc. Being an infantry unit in this game, they are considered a soft counter to air. In the rock, paper, scissors of Halo Wars, infantry beats air, vehicles beat infantry, and air beats vehicles. Here's the numbers on their upgrades and how that affects their stats. All the unit stats are going to come from the Halo Wars unit spreadsheet found off the old Halo Wars website from Ensemble Studios. Link will be down below. The penultimate upgrade for the Marine Squad, only available to Captain Cutter, is the ODST squad. I would go as far as saying they are the best infantry unit in the game due to a multitude of reasons. First, they are very strong, they've got the rocket ability, and they have an X factor. You can drop them anywhere on the map that you have vision. This makes them really good in any sort of pinch situation where, let's say, your army gets wiped out and you need to refill some population. You just drop some more squads in, and they can really shred a lot of units. They can even take on their direct counter units like Jackals or Flamers, simply for the fact that you can just rebuild them, and your opponent can't drop in more Jackals or Flamers on the dot. So that's why they do so well against them. They just outnumber them. They are excellent garrison units. Just do fantastic. Just drop one in, and if it dies, just drop another one in. Really annoying to deal with if you're playing against multiple Captain Cutters. I'd say their biggest drawback is the fact that you need to maintain 3 technology to drop them, and also their upgrade costs 1800 and it takes a while. If you're struggling with ODST spam, make sure you attack those reactors first so they can't drop anymore. The anti-infantry of the UNSC, the Flamer Squad, the crispy boys that toast their enemies with long schlong flamers. Flamers are great for early game rush defense. They're also very good in 1v1s. There's a lot of meta that surrounds flamers with taking control of the resource hooks and the reactors on those tiny maps. They fall down the tier list in 2v2, 3v3, because their role gets taken over fairly quickly by other units that just do their job a lot better, like tanks or Warthogs. They're pretty slow too, so those larger maps are not ideal. Fun fact, their base speed is actually just slightly faster than that of a Marines, so they can catch up to them if need be. Flamers have 3 major upgrades, first being Flashbang, which stuns other infantry units, besides heroes. Second is Napalm Adherent. It adds a burning effect to their flame, their AoE damage, so targets will take damage over time, even if they're not under fire by the flamers. And then third is Oxide Tank, which turns their flames blue, and it's just overall a damage increase. You can see the Napalm Adherent working on these rebels here. I started attacking the second one, and the first one's still burning from that damage over time. This is the effect of flashbang that can be used on infantry inside of garrisons or just on their own, walking around. The most iconic thing about Halo, the Spartan Super Soldier, they're just overall a fantastic unit. So fantastic, in fact, that you can only have 3 built at any point in time. These green hobgoblins do well in just about any situation. 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, you always want to try to find a way to incorporate them in your army and command some of your vehicles. That is their biggest strength. Every time a Spartan gets an upgrade or a veterancy star, it adds a multiplier to their damage output, which stacks even further if you jump them into a vehicle that has upgrades, and it multiplies exponentially. So that's why they're so strong. Also, the ability to hijack your enemy's vehicles can turn the tide of battle, like in this 1v1 here I was playing a few months back. Spartans on their own are good in light skirmishes and small battles, but don't expect them to take on a full-fledged army all by their lonesomes. I see a lot of players immediately rush for Spartans at the beginning of the game to try to get them veterancy, and that isn't always the most important thing, because if they die, you don't really have an army to back it up. Definitely build your army first, and then follow it up with some Spartan upgrades. Speaking of upgrades, here are the Spartans' 3 upgrades. Spartans are especially effective with Professor Anders. Her cryobomb and Gremlins can stun enemy vehicles. That makes for easy hijacking. Next we have the Bipedal Metal Terror, the worst unit in the game, Sergeant Forge's Cyclops. I really can't think of any sort of competitive viability that this unit has. It does have a few cool little gimmicks that it can do, but nothing that really makes it useful. The Cyclops is a melee infantry unit that specializes in attacking enemy structures, buildings. They actually get quite a large bonus when they attack buildings and bases, but they don't really fare much well in open combat against any other unit like a Warthog or a tank, even Marines for that factor. And who knows, maybe someday we'll find a way we can use them admirably. This is a fully upgraded Cyclops here, whacking away at a easy AI base. But yeah, maybe we could find some sort of usefulness for them. They do have 2 major upgrades, first being Repair Kit, allowing them to fix friendly mechanical units and buildings. The second gives them a speed boost. Since they're an infantry, they can take advantage of adrenaline boost as well, found in the field armory. Cyclops also have a Y ability where they can throw debris at other enemy units. As you can see here, they have some anti-air capabilities as well. So climbing our way out of the pits of hell where the Cyclops resides, we come to the pearly gates with the Warthog. I'm going to just come out and say that I think the Warthog is the best unit in the game for a multitude of reasons. It is a very fast scout unit that can be constructed from any of your main bases, and it does a lot of damage. 3 upgrades for the Warthog. First adds the gunner turret, allowing it to deal some range damage. Second is Grenadier, giving it a side passenger that does little extra DPS. And our final upgrade is the Gauss Cannon. Quite an amazing upgrade for the Warthog, and is very, very notorious. About 95% of the time when I play UNSC, I'm definitely building 3 Warthogs at the start to help clear out an expo and go scout enemy bases. They're really dangerous in large numbers. When they reach a critical mass, it's super hard to stop them or slow them down, just because they can be everywhere at once and just dish out so much damage when they're fully upgraded. Most high-level games are decided in the early minutes based on who can accumulate more Warthogs, has a better Warthog micro, kills more of the enemy's Warthogs, just to take that map control. And when they get their last upgrade, the Gauss Cannon, they even are a very good anti-air option, taking out Banshees, Hornets, and Hawks fairly easily. The best way to stop mass Warthogs is to go into tank production, be it Wraiths or Scorpions. Scorpions do way better than Wraiths. And also have an Arbiter on your team. Arbiter does so well with that rage mode. Warthogs are really good for early aggression in taking down opponents' fresh expansions and keeping eyes all over the map to see what they're up to. Warthogs do have the ability to ram other units as well, making them a great counter for infantry and also even hunter squads. They just smoke hunter squads when you ram them. Another slight annoyance with Warthogs is that they do take quite a bit to produce, so definitely recommend that you get the reserves upgrade in the field armory if you plan on spamming them out. So yeah, Warthogs are definitely a stone pillar in the Halo Wars meta. The Elephant is Captain Cutter's second unique unit, being a mobile barracks in a way. You can drive it around and make Marines, Flamers, or Spartans out of it. Sadly, it's not very good, doesn't have a lot of useful attributes to it, and they're only really built for special circumstances anyway, so they don't see a lot of use. With just 3 machine guns on the hull, they really don't do good in direct combat, and they're best placed out of sight, so you can train the infantry units and then walk them into the battle. That's what I would recommend. Also, everybody's played with that one guy on 14 that immediately just builds an elephant and drives it to the center of the map to take all of those little garrison buildings. That can be useful in, say, a turtle situation, but the expense, I think, really just puts you behind your opponents in terms of economy. You're playing the catch-up game because you spend all that money on troops for the walls that just get shot by the first Scorpion tanks that pumped out. One thing that you all may not be aware of is that the elephants can actually prohibit you from building a structure. So if you park them over a building spot, you will be unable, your opponent can't build anything there, like a supply pad or a turret or something like that. So if maybe that would be a possibility if there was like a triple cutter rush on Exile and everybody just parked their elephants down on the supply pads. The elephants have 3 main upgrades. First is Twin Engine, which gives them a 30% speed boost. Next up we have Defense Turret, which places a larger additional turret on the top of the elephant and also upgrades the damage of every single turret. However, this will only appear when the elephant is locked down. And lastly, the final upgrade, Ceramic Armor, gives a major health boost to the elephant. One tactic you can use with the elephant is as a rush defense tool. If you're playing teams like 2v2 or 3v3, and your ally gets Covenant rushed, build an elephant, park it outside his base, maybe out of sight, and just start making some flamers to help out with the battle. And that will sum up the elephant. Here we have the Greasy Grimy Gremlin, a wonderful tactical unit only available to Professor Anders. The Gremlin is a lightly armored anti-vehicle unit that has the unique ability to stun other enemy vehicles. The meta today highly revolves around tank play, so you can see why this would be so important. And it really is another reason why Anders is just such a strong leader. They have a really decent range, and they also get a bonus when attacking vehicles. They're considered an anti-vehicle unit, so they deal more damage towards them. Biggest drawback definitely is their health. They have, I think, a third more health than that of a Warthog. They're very weak. I'll often say they're made out of tin foil. They just die instantly if they're in direct combat. And building off of that If you have them in the front of your army and you lose them all, they really don't serve a purpose. So they're a very micro-intense unit, keeping them very safe in the back of your army, managing your stuns properly. You don't want to do an all-unit stun on just one tank that's in the front of their army. You want to click on each gremlin and make use of each of their stuns on a different tank to get their full effectiveness. Well, let's go over their upgrades. So the gremlin has 2 upgrades. Focusing lens increases the range and damage of the laser. And then chain amplifier, super important upgrade, allows multiple tanks to be stunned at once. So like a chain effect if they're close together. Here is what the unupgraded stun looks like. During my research, I also found something kind of interesting. The focusing lens upgrade, it only upgrades the red attack beam. It doesn't actually extend the range of the stun beam. And this is a recent 3v3 I played, and it really shows off the importance of chain amplifier. So you can see one stun will stun multiple tanks. You'll see I'll try to only select one gremlin at a time when I use the stun, just to try to hit as many tanks as possible with it. Gremlins do great in all the game types, 1s, 2s, and 3s. They have a lot of purposes, except when you're playing against all Covenant. You really won't need to build them then, just because Covenant mainly go air or infantry, so not necessary. But yeah, Gremlins are great units, and just remember to keep them protected so you can maximize their stun effectiveness. The Wolverine, UNSC's best anti-air option aside from Goshawks. These guys do tons of damage to enemy units. They have a missile launcher that locks onto enemy air, and for ground targets, a small grenade launcher. They're a great kiting unit as well. They auto-lock on, so you can just stick 4 in your army, 3 to 4, and just let them do their work. They just absolutely shred Banshees and other units like Hornets as well. Their little ground mortar, it does a little bit of damage too. It's kind of like a catapult in a way. It's got like a lobbing effect where you can put it on like an elevated surface and it'll actually fire down elevations like this. The only reason that Wolverines aren't godlike is just because they're stuck on the ground. They are limited to whatever path is in front of them to follow air units, and air units obviously don't have that restriction. They can just fly all over the place, fly behind buildings, fly over a giant mountain range, and it can be hard to catch up to them. So they're definitely better on defense, like sitting by a base or just sticking with your army for that reason. They can't keep up with boost Banshees. If they go to one base, then they fly across the whole map, etc. You can see why that would be kind of annoying and one of the drawbacks to the Wolverine. Let's talk about upgrades. Volley adds the ability to shoot their anti-air missiles at a ground target, and then they also have the dual launcher upgrade, which adds a second missile pod, increasing their damage output and also the volley output. Surprisingly, volley actually does a decent amount of damage to ground targets like buildings or other units, so it's great to have. And you can also do that lobbing effect. Let's say enemies below you, you can volley down onto them too. My one tip I'd say with the Wolverines, definitely try to get volley before you build them. They just get shredded without having that upgrade. The Banshees with boost can actually kind of fight them, and even if they're higher than that, still they'll smoke them. Next up, we have the UNSC Cobra. It's an anti-vehicle, a vehicle, where it be, and it has the unique ability to lock down and extend the range of its railgun. Cobras are actually not that bad if you get them where they need to go and you, say, line up a bunch of them. They can just shred an army of tanks really quickly, especially if you put Spartans in them. You can just one-shot those suckers. The drawback with Cobras is the fact that they're just so slow. It's really hard to get them set up into proper position, just where you need them to be, and even then your enemy can just find a way around them, just try not to engage them. So only really used in like a super turtle situation, or like in a choke point, a very tight enclosed area, which is why they do better in the 1v1 maps, because those are a little smaller. And they also perform really well on like Fort Dean, of course. They can just hide behind the walls, or the Glacial Ravine, right in that center there, that small little alleyway. They have no anti-air. They are basically useless against Covenant units because Covenant really don't build vehicles. And also the just infantry wrecks them, like Marine squads, ODST squads, or Hunters, just take them out easily. Cobras are great on defense, defending your own base, or doing the leapfrog strategy, which is like, say, lining up 3 of them, lock them down, and then put 2 more Cobras in front of them, and then unlock those 3 behind them, and just keep kind of moving up and up and up, inching closer and closer to the enemy base. 2 upgrades for the Cobra. Deflection plating will bounce off certain projectiles like a Hunter Blast or a Banshee Bomb, Canister Shell. It's only active though when the Cobra is locked down. Can't use it otherwise. Second, we have Piercing Shot. Now this one's a little bit more interesting. Now the effect says that it will pierce through other enemy units. So I tested this for a few hours, and I just thought something was off. Like, it doesn't seem that the shot actually goes through. I think that there may be like a percentage chance that each shot may go through the target. A lot of times I just see it impact and nothing else. I could be wrong though. If anybody knows, comment down below what your experience is. Now, if you've played Halo Wars for a while, you know about the Cobra's final evolution, the Vulcan super unit. It's the only unofficial super unit in the game. Well, maybe one more. But essentially, you just plop down a bunch of Cobras in the same little square using an exploit with a Pelican, and it's just a beast. The thing looks like a laser beam, destroys anything in its path. Yowzers, Mama Jamma, we got the Scorpion tank. I'm going to say the close second best unit in the game. I still think Warthogs take it, but Scorpions dominate the mid to late game. Built in every game, really regardless of the situation. They are the main force of attack for any UNSC. Yeah, just a fantastic unit. Especially with their upgrades and then putting Spartans into them. They just deal massive amounts of damage and can take on literally almost any unit in the game. I'd say the only thing they really struggle with would be like mass air armies of Banshees or Hawks. Those do really good against them. They even have little machine gun turrets that can chip away at some of the air units. They just have so much health too that it's so hard to stop a fully upgraded tank army. Speaking of upgrades, the standard Scorpion has 2. First being Canister Shell, fires a explosive area of effect blast that recharges over time. It just does so much damage. It's great. It's essential. You never want to have just stock tanks. You want to try to get to Canister Shell as soon as possible. And the infamous secondary upgrade, Power Turret, just makes the tank's turret spin a lot more faster, makes them a lot more responsive, and is so strong. It just makes them, you can see it's the other upgrade that improves their damage, so it's a definite must-have. The Gremlin actually does well against them, getting that stun ability off, putting those in your army. Gremlins, cryo bombs are I'd say the biggest reason why people consider Professor Anders to be the best leader in the game. Just the ability to push pause on your enemy units. Another area that they don't do very well in is like a choke point, trying to funnel them through a tight space, and you have like Cobras on the other side of that. That is something that they struggle with. Also, if they're going up against hunters in that tight quarters, that can be tough to deal with. The hunters are actually not the most ideal way to try and stop tanks, only because there is a glitch. It's called the canister shell glitch that lets you infinitely attack or spam the canister shell against enemy infantry units as long as you perform it right, which is why Banshees are preferred to fight them, or Hawks for that reason. And you probably have the question, why do I think Scorpions are not the best unit in the game? So my opinion, if you have a really well-oiled team, or you have a really tight build order, the Warthogs are going to be out on the field way before you're going to get to Tech 2, and a good player will be able to stop your production of tanks. And same thing with a good team. They'll be able to prevent you from getting to power turret, which is why a lot of these really high-level games you see they're revolving around mass Gosshogs. So even if you get get some tanks out in the field, like a bunch of just stock tanks with no upgrade, Gosshogs are still going to be able to just sweep them up with all the numbers that they have, just because they lack the health and the damage output to really stop all of them. So that's why I think Warthogs are the best, just because of the speed that they offer and the ability to shut down the transition into tanks, which that's where tanks struggle the most, is in Tier 1 or the early parts of the game. But if you can get past that point, if you can hold out long enough to get your tank army up, you're golden. You're golden, pony boy. I really don't know what happened with the Grizzly. So on paper, it is the final upgrade for the Scorpion available to Sergeant Forge, but in reality, it just underperforms. It is not a very good upgrade, and it even loses to power turret tanks in direct combat. The Grizzly has a massive amount of health, and it does great against enemy infantry units, be it like ODST squads, Grunt squads. Hunters not so much, but that's its main usefulness, is clearing enemy infantry, light targets. I really don't know what happened. I'm not sure if somebody was just not testing it properly, or maybe there was some sort of coding thing or math that didn't add up, but I'll show you here. The Grizzly it loses to its inferior power turret. In smaller engagements, like a one-on-one, Scorpions will lose, and same in like a 2v2. When they get into these larger numbers, like we're talking like 4, 5, 6, you can really see the difference. The Grizzlies, for whatever reason, lose. Their canister shells appear to be weaker, also not dealing as much damage. I don't know if it's because they shoot out 2 of them and the Scorpions just shoot out 1, and sometimes those aren't always on target, so that might be a reason. But yeah, it's unfortunate. It really makes Forge not as good as he really could have been, or he was intended to be, I'd say. So overall, they do okay. You know, their damage output is pretty decent. But who wants to spend 1,800 resources for a downgrade? I know I don't, and a lot of other players agree, which is why you rarely ever see people using them unless they kind of really don't know any better. But yeah. Here we have the big ol' rolling turd, aka the UNSC Vulture. It's an Uber unit, allegedly, and it's awful. The only time you're actually gonna be successful with Vultures is if your opponents do not scout you and you just sneak attack them and wipe out their base, Well, at least that's the only time I've ever been successful with Vultures. They're very expensive, they move very slowly, and they're really weak, too. Each Vulture costs about 900 resources, and fun fact, they cannot be hijacked. For an Uber unit, the Vulture has about 20% more health than that of a standard Scorpion tank. Not an upgraded Scorpion tank, a standard Scorpion tank, so that's really, really unfortunate. The Mega Barrage upgrade doubles the amount of missiles from 4 to 8 that you can use in the viability. Strangely, also, the Mega Barrage upgrade does not increase the health or the damage done by the Vulture. I think that may be one of the only few units that does that. One thing I never really noticed, though, it's kind of cool, I didn't know the missile silos actually emptied out when you fired the Mega Barrage. If you take a closer look, you'll see that the missiles are covered up when your ability is recharging, and then they will reopen when it's ready again. Also, the Cryo Bomb does trade pretty well for them, being 600 resources for a Cryo. Taking out a $900 Vulture, or maybe even 2 of them, is definitely cost effective. A fully upgraded Cryo will kill a maximum of 2 full health Vultures. Vultures also, they have a unique anti-air ability as well. They have little missile pods that will auto-lock on to close by air units, and it does actually kind of well against Banshees, Hornets, that sort of thing. As hard as it may be to believe, there are a few positives to Vultures. They dish out some of the highest DPS in all of Halo Wars. If you can sneak these guys up onto a base, they will just destroy that thing with the Mega Barrage. I think that Vultures are slightly better in a 3v3 situation. Reason being, it's a little easier to get them online while your allies defend you. On 1v1 or 2v2 maps, it's really hard to try and hide what you're doing. Just those maps are super tiny, so it's easier to scout them, and yeah, they're very hard countered by anti-air. And I gotta say, there is nothing in this game that will make you look more like an alpha Chad than dominating your opponent with Vultures. If you can win with Vultures, oof, it's a good feeling. Also, it's a great meme as well. Following in the footsteps of the Papa Bear Vulture, the UNSC Hornet is their mainline battle aircraft, and it feels just underwhelming. So the trend with UNSC is their main source of power comes from their ground units, so they definitely sacrifice a lot in their air units, and Hornets are just not preferred to fight tanks or Goshawks. Versus Covenant, no, that's a completely different story. So Covenant really only have one answer to the Hornet, being the Vampire, and the Vampire is only available in Tech 2, so a UNSC can definitely get to Hornets way before Vampires are available, especially on some certain maps. However, once they are up on the field, they don't really perform against Vamps at all, like just because, obviously they're anti-air. But Hornets are awesome for stripping bases, and especially when you couple them together with the Goshawks, and you use the Goshawks for your anti-air, Hornets for your base damage. It's a really good combo. 2 upgrades for the Hornet, the standard Hornet. Wingman adds 2 soldiers with rocket launchers on the sides, and the final upgrade, Chaff Pods, adds a flare system that will divert enemy projectiles, say an RPG or a missile from a Wolverine or a needle from a vampire. It'll cause those shots to miss. Also, Hornets are great at countering Covenant Wraith Rush, say a one-on-one situation. A Covenant like bum rushes you, a bunch of Wraiths, and you get some Hornets up. Very hard to deal with because they've devoted so much of those resources to that rush. They're not really focusing on getting into Tech 2. As for the team modes, 2v2, 3v3, they are really not preferred, just because Banshees are so much faster, and they have that Banshee bomb ability, which it just shreds tanks really, really fast. Also, the Wolverines do perform really well against them, just because the Hornets are a lot slower, and the Wolverines can keep pace with them pretty well. This is an example here, a game I played a few months back, where I did get Wraith Rush, so I saw the factory up and I transitioned into Hornets. Him having an Arbiter, it's also really tough to deal with that, because if the Hornets fly over the non-passable terrain and the Arbiter rages, Arbiter's going to die because it's like an environment glitch. So I'm going to abuse that and attempt to strip the buildings off of its base. The last little piece of advice I have, if you're planning on building Hornets, would be for a tech switch, like a mid-game tech switch. So you rush into a bunch of standard Hornets, rush over to your enemy base, start attacking, force them to build a lot of anti-air, and in the meantime you are transitioning into something else like tanks in the background. That can be a deadly strategy. I don't think they'll win the game for you, the Hornets, but they'll definitely put some good pressure on. Alright, we've made it a very long way, but we have the final UNSC unit, the Hawk, only available to Professor Anders, the final upgrade for the Hornet. If you thought Anders was already strong, this just is the icing on the cake. The very fast, very mobile, lot of damage dealing Hawk it's a monster. The laser cannons on the sides do a lot of damage. They are an anti-vehicle laser, so they just do a lot of damage to vehicles, especially Scorpion tanks, which is their main purpose. They just shred armies of power turret tanks like it's nothing. UNSC have a tough time dealing with Hawks, being that they only have the Wolverines. Hawks are so mobile, so they can easily evade them, or just say run over like a mountain or something and avoid them. The best way to take down a giant army of Hawks is to have some upgraded vampires hold them in place, and then maybe some Wolverine support or some other units to help finish them off. You have to buy the upgrades for your anti-air units if you expect to fight the Hawks off, because otherwise they're just going to melt whatever you throw at them. Even vampires or Wolverines, for that example, they'll just get melted if they don't have like dual launcher or stasis bomb. If there's a mob of them, they'll just overwhelm them. I placed them a little lower in 1v1 and 2v2, simply because on those maps it's harder to get the Hawk upgrade than it is on 3v3. In 3s, you can have your teammates help you out and distract the enemy while you're sneaking up on some Hawks. But 1v1, 2v2, if you're getting scouted, it's gonna get pretty countered almost immediately, I'd say. But if you get them out, and let's say they build a bunch of Wolverines or some Vamps, you're already Professor Anders. So in the meantime, in the background, just start upgrading your Scorpion tanks, and then do a tech switch. So that's the Hawks, and that's also the end of the chump UNSCs. Now we can get onto the good stuff. The heavenly armies of the Prophet. First of all, commendations to all y'all who've made it this far in the video. Be sure to take a break if you need to, grab some snacks, and get ready for part 2. First unit is the Grunts. This is the Elite version. And then we have the Brute Squad version. Elites are available to the Arbiter Prophet, and the Brute is to the Brute Chieftain. Grunts are pretty underwhelming. They perform pretty good on infantry-heavy maps, smaller maps, tighter quarters, less distance for them to walk because they're very, very slow. They're also very weak and very cheap, too. Elite squads, I think, are a little more combat effective. They don't miss really any shots. They're very accurate on target. And on the other hand, the Brute variant, their Brute shot has the potential to overshoot their targets and not deal any damage at all. Something I didn't know before this video, looking at the stats, is that the grunts and the elites are actually affected differently by the upgrades. The very first upgrade being peons adds an additional grunt to the squad, overall increasing the DPS of the squad. Then we have needler, which makes the shots track, and overall another buff to DPS. And then lastly, there is the Deacon upgrade, which adds the final grunt, the fifth grunt, that has the little holy halo around his head, ironically speaking. A really good strategy with the grunt squads is a hall rush. And in this situation, I did spawn on the reactor side, so I went straight for needler, and I looked for a Covenant base that did not have a shield. That is key to be really effective. And the grunts are so cheap, you just spam them out with a mix of brute squads, and it's hard to deal with because there's just so much of them. I see a lot of good players spam this style of a strategy, use this plasma grenades to strip the opponent's building, and if this is happening to you, I would definitely recommend you take out the Chieftain as soon as you can, or the leader first, to stop the flow. Grunts are also a soft counter to air, being an infantry, and also having that needler makes it easier for them to shoot at air. However, they're just really slow, they can't catch up, and mid-game, they're pretty much out of the fight once Scorpions get involved or any other mainline unit. They fall pretty fast. So that's the grunts. They would fall right where you expect them to be. Not that great, also not that bad, kind of in the middle. As the saying goes, you never trust a man in a tunic, and same goes for the Jackal, the sleeveless anti-infantry unit. It must be really cold in that winter there. Never wearing sleeves. But anyways, Jackals, really good, solid all-around unit. Often used mostly in 1v1s. I'll preface to say I'm definitely not the best ones player, but I definitely enjoy it. And Jackals are key for maintaining hook control and often pushing out onto your opponent. In a Covenant 1v1, it's pretty much just a Jackal 1v1. Who can get to beam rifle first? Who can get to Supreme Gauntlet first? The Jackals will insta-kill the leaders in bigger numbers, and also they can do a good amount of damage to enemy air units like Banshees, Vampires, unless they have like a massive army of Vampires, but if you've got beam rifle, you're usually pushing up before then anyways. Jackals are less used in the 2v2, 3v3. Normally you have a UNSC teammate, and their tanks are going to act as your anti-infantry, which makes you go into air. So that's why they're not as important in 2s and 3s. They kind of fall down the list. Another important note is they do beat Flamers in a direct confrontation. Jackals are going to outrange Flamers and take home the victory. Let's move on over to the upgrades. First, their iconic gauntlet, the defense gauntlet, their blue shield that they carry, makes them more damage resistant, helps deflect a few incoming shots. Second, I'd say the most important upgrade for the Jackals, beam rifle, giving them that great damage buff and also that extra range. Their shots are a lot more accurate too, so it's a really necessary upgrade if you're going to be building Jackals. Final upgrade, Supreme Gauntlet, makes their shield much stronger and able to deflect a lot more projectiles where it be. So yeah, slap that one on there too if you can. Some other Jackal uses include, but are not limited to, fighting a flying prophet, and also defending against ODST spam. Like if you're getting harassed constantly, keeping 3 or 4, maybe like I'd say more rather 5 or 6 Jackals with beam rifle on the side of your base, out of range of the ODSTs, can really help pick them off if you are if there are just you're playing with multiple Covenant on your team. And that is the Jackal. Next up, the spiky tentacle worm creatures. the Hunter pairs, the Covenant anti-vehicle infantry. If you use them the right way, they are a really strong unit, but are easily exploited. A few reasons being, they can't shoot at air, and they are outpaced by a lot of the vehicles that they're trying to catch up to. Like, for example, a Scorpion tank drives faster than them, so you can see why that would be hard to catch up. Oh, damn. Set that guy to Pound Town. Being that they're sort of sluggish, I think that makes them a great defensive unit. If your opponent's getting aggressive with some vehicles, forcing them to engage the hunters it's a good option. Makes them just deal lots of damage to them and focus on that rather than the base. They are a great unit to hot drop as well, meaning that if you say get your leader behind an enemy base, just port them all through the teleporter. Super effective if you have the Flying Prophet. You can just fly right wherever you want to go and then drop down a bunch of hunters, and they do a really good amount of damage if they're stationary. One more reason why they're not preferred to fight tanks. I'd say Banshees are the preferred method to fight tanks, but since they're an infantry, they can be affected by the canister shell glitch. And if you don't know what that is, I'll put a link to my tips and tricks video and kind of show you what that does. But it basically, if you have an infantry unit and you spam it just right, you can get unlimited canister shells on infantry, which is not good. So yeah, to recap, they're a great defensive unit, and they're just a slow rolling, steamrolling infantry. Let's look at their upgrades. First, Bonded Shield. It's going to add the large shield to the front and also possibly deflect some projectiles. Not a whole lot, but it does help with some armor. Next we have Spirit Bond, which gives the hunters a sort of a symbiotic relationship boost. Adds an extra 30% damage if they are both alive. Really nice upgrade, so definitely grab that in Tier 2. Final upgrade, Assault Beam turns their beam projectiles to a beam laser. Is a great late game upgrade and can help decide the fate of many 3v3 games. Here's that Assault Beam in action, especially effective when you get behind an enemy base, just in a tight chokehold area that forces the vehicles to jump up on you and really get up close. That's how they do their best work. Here we have the bread and butter of the Covenant, the Banshee. By far, I would say their best attacking unit, being really, really fast, and they have a great damage output. They strive in the hit and run tactic. They have an ability, lets them boost anywhere on the map. They are the fastest moving unit in the game, and coupled with that impressive Banshee Bomb, it can strip a lot of bases or take out an unsuspecting army. So they have the boost ability, of course, which recharges very fast and allows them to travel pretty much the entire map anytime that they want to. The next upgrade, Repeating Cannon, increases the rate of fire of all the Banshee's weapons, but it actually only increases the damage of the Fuel Rod Cannon. And if you thought that wasn't enough, the Banshees have one final trick up their sleeve. They will sacrifice themselves for the glory of the Prophet and spiral out into a glorious kamikaze attack. Banshees being anti-vehicle makes them a great way to fight tanks. Tanks can't shoot their cannon at them, so they can only machine gun upwards. So that is their main usage. Secondly, running around enemy bases, destroying supply pads, just kind of being annoying like that, hit and run tactics. So in the current meta, the Banshees, or the Covenant Air, is definitely way better than the UNSC for these reasons. Best way to stop mass Banshees is to go mass Vampires, so you can stasis them in place and then deal your damage that way so they don't just boost away. Cryo Bomb, of course, helps. Warthogs do actually surprisingly well against Banshees until the Banshees get about sacrifice area. And if you are playing UNSC and you end up building Wolverines do a good amount of damage to them, but they can't keep up with them. So it's it's important to place them strategically around your base or just in your army. So that way, if they keep boosting from base to base to base and stripping pads or blowing up expos, you have Wolverines waiting for them. Make sure you buy the Wolverine upgrade, like I said earlier in the video, or you'll see this will happen. They're just too weak to fight Sacrifice. Banshees are pretty cheap as well, so you can employ the double summit strategy. It's where you upgrade 4 pads on your main, then you get 2 summits. You always want to buy the boost upgrade first. It's just a necessity. Then you start harassing expansions and putting on lots of pressure. I absolutely love the Engineer. I think it is a really cool unit. It is the Covenant's healing, floating little blob thing. They definitely fall in the above average unit category. I thought B was perfect for them. I think they're one of the most underutilized units in the game, and I think that they could really be a lot better than a lot of people think. I mean, you think about it, you just build, say, a summit midway through the game, pump out 3 engineers, and then you just delete the summit. You just kind of hide them in your base. I think that there's definitely some potential. One thing that I think engineers do extremely well is they're a awesome rush defense tool. Now, granted, they don't fight anything, but let's say you have some buildings that are under attack, or you've got your ally has some turrets he's building. You can slap those engineers on there and help sustain them a lot longer. You definitely want to target them first in any engagement. 2 upgrades for the engineers. They don't actually appear in my spreadsheet that I was using, so I don't know what their health points are or how they are affected by the upgrades. First upgrade is State of Grace, which does make the healing process a lot faster. I don't know the exact percentage, but I'm thinking it's anywhere from an extra 25% to an extra 50% faster heal rate. The final upgrade for the engineers, Harmonious Digestion, improves their speed, and I think that looks like about a 25% increase. Engineers, of course, are susceptible to all anti-air attacks, and they also share some characteristics of infantry. For example, beam rifle Jackals do a lot of damage to them, actually, so that's what makes me think they're like a flying infantry combo. And yeah, like I was saying, I really wish that people would build engineers more, just for the sake of having them in your army to, say, heal up some bruised units after an engagement when you, say, pull back from a fight. That's what UNSC does. They heal with their little healing ring, and I don't know, I feel like there is some potential there. Oh, also, engineers do have one final, shall I say, final evolution that we will get to a little later on in the video. Moving on to what I think is one of the most aesthetically cool looking units, the Vampire. By far the best air unit in the entire game. Now, if you know anything about vampires, you know that they suck, right? Get it? They like to suck things, but this unit does not suck at all. Well, it does. It sucks, but it sucks the opponent's health from them. Sucks, you know, you get it. That ability will lock opponents in place, and it will drain their opponent's health and heal the vampire at the same time. The stasis ability will catch those pesky Banshees when they start flying over your bases and harassing you. Great way to keep them stationary so you can deal tons of damage to them. Any sort of Covenant mirror match will more than likely evolve into a giant vampire war, because vampires dominate the skies, and the Covenant really don't have a great a ground anti-air option, so you just have to really outproduce your opponent. They're another big reason why Vultures are so poo-poo, because you can just lock the Vultures down with 5 or 6 vampires and take out all of them. I'd say one thing that vampires really struggle with is base damage, which is, in my opinion, their biggest drawback. Sure, they're a great unit that can, you know, start peppering some hunters or some tanks, and of course Banshees or Hornets. But when it comes to attacking like a fully shielded Covenant base with turrets, or a UNSC base for that matter, it takes them quite a while to actually kill it. The Suck has 2 upgrades. When it's unupgraded, the only thing it does is makes targets stationary and deals a small amount of damage. Second is Stasis Drain, which actually will heal the vampire. And third is Stasis Bomb, which creates a area of effect blast once a unit has been fully sucked. And according to the spreadsheet, the vampire's health is actually not affected by any upgrades. It's not uncommon for Covenant players in team games to just simply go all vampires. They counter all air units, so Hawks, Banshees, Vultures, and their little cannons will do some DPS to ground units like tanks or enemy hunters. So they're just kind of floating above the armies and dealing a slight amount of DPS. The heavy needles do the most damage, I'd say, overall, and are good if you can't afford to get the vampire stasis upgrade fast enough. Just try flying around and using those needles, because they do a lot of damage. This is an easy AI here. I just wanted to show off the stasis up close. So if you do get the stasis up close, your vampire is still going to fire from his side cannons as well, providing just a very slight extra damage. Moving on to our first unique Covenant unit, only available to the Brute Chieftain, the Brute Squad. What a great infantry this is. They coined the infamous Brute Rush, where you walk your Chieftain over to the enemy base and start attacking supply pads with the dropped-in Brute Squads. Really devastating in the early parts of the game. The fact that they're a tier 1 unit, meaning they can be dropped in whenever, makes them the best Covenant unit for acquiring and maintaining the hooks, just due to the damage output that they have. They can clump up together and be a lot more effective too. We call it a brute ball. When you've got like 5 or 6 brutes all together, it'll wreck any unit that gets close to it. Tanks even, hogs, you name it. They have to get close to the hogs though. One thing the hogs can do to stop them is kind of kite around them, and it's hard for the brutes to track onto them unless they're really close quarters, because as we saw earlier, the brute shots tend to miss a lot of their projectiles, and that stays the same for the actual brute squad. Also, camping the lift is another good strat you can do, and what I mean by that is parking your Warthog right in front of the gravity lift on your opponent's base, and you can smash into enemy units before they come through. That's a great option to start pushing back against the brute spam, and it can be critical if you're trying to deny the brute from taking control of a lot of the hooks. So I put the brute as an S for 1s and an A for 2 and 3. The reason I did that is I feel that when you have a teammate, it is a lot easier to actually stop the brute rush. Your teammate can come in and kind of push it off, whereas if you're just by yourself, it's a lot more difficult. Also, 2s and 3s tend to go more into the late game, where brutes aren't used as often in the late game, so that's why I felt that they didn't perform as well as they do in 1s. Some good ways to counter a brute rush, like I said, Warthogs. You could go into like a double barracks flamer defense. Warthog rams are great. Arbiter raging can take a lot of brutes out. So there's a lot of ways to stop it. I know it's one of the most complained about tactics in this game. And you know, I understand that from a new player's perspective, it can be kind of challenging to deal with. So definitely don't get discouraged. There are lots of things you can do. Heck, you know, I wouldn't say build turrets though. Turrets still get they get messed up by brutes, but build some units instead. Alright, now let's talk about that drip that the brutes get. So, first piece of swag is a Chad. Jump pack allows them to traverse many of impassable terrain, surprise their enemies, or escape certain dangers like a raging Arbiter perhaps, or a bunch of canister shells. The final upgrade is really interesting. It's the electric shock upgrade, which stuns enemy vehicles just like Anders Gremlin does. It is very underutilized in my opinion, and I would love to see if there's any potential for the meta to be evolved with this. Oh, also, these are easy Wraiths. Don't think brutes are this much of a steamroller. They're not. These Wraiths are just very, very weak. And the last thing I'll say about brutes is they're just kind of chunky overall, so they have a slower move speed, which can hinder them. Especially with like Warthogs or tanks that they're trying to catch up to. So definitely having them on the base where you're forced to engage them is the best spot for them overall. Here we have the most honorable guard, the Prophet's Sworn Protector and Lover. They are a melee close-range infantry unit, doing about 180 DPS, so slightly more than the Brute Squads. Great rushing unit, putting on a lot of damage to enemy infantries, defending like a Covenant rush. Great for attacking opposing leaders as well. And on top of that, they do put out a good amount of base damage too, making them efficient at killing buildings like some supply pads or others. They arrive right in the mid-tier simply for the fact that they are probably the most easy unit to kite in the game, meaning as long as you just keep kind of backpedaling and shooting at them, they can't do much. But if you fight them man-to-man, they'll show you they ain't no punk. They ain't no punk, dog. They'll mess you up. But if you're gonna be a bitch and fly away from them, or try to drive your little Warthog and shoot at them, well, you ain't man enough to really experience what the honor guards have to offer. They also occupy the garrisons very peacefully. They can't really attack anybody unless they like threw their sword or something, but they don't do that. The first upgrade for the honor guard gives them the invisibility cloak upgrade. Only 2 units in the game can turn invisible, and honor guard is one of them, so how cool is that? Static defenses will ignore you if you are not engaging them, that is. And also enemy units cannot detect you either. There is really no way to detect a cloaked unit in this game unless you say can hit them with like a leader power, or their cloak just expires. The second upgrade that they have is the personal shield, which I'd say it practically just doubles their health, like 1.5 times worth of their health. Microable as well, so if somebody's weak with the shield, you just pull them back out of the fight, let that recharge, pull them back in, and rinse and repeat. But not often used, just due to the fact that honor guards aren't really built that often outside of garrisons. I could see them working against like ODST spam maybe, or say like a lot of hunters, something like that. So yeah, to recap, the honor guard is a very good rush unit, also a great rush defense unit. Like I was saying earlier, it is a good way to stop the aforementioned brute rush, making a bunch of honor guards and having them whack away at the chieftain or slice up the individual squads. So I think people would be surprised if they built them a little bit more, especially with that cloak ability, getting some scouts off, or like some secret ODST drops using their line of vision. Our final unique unit we have for the Covenant is the Suicide Grunt, exclusive to the Arbiter. They sacrifice their own lives for the glory of the Prophet and to cheese enemy buildings and bases. Most commonly used to strip an opponent's supply pads, like say heavy supply pads on an opposing Covenant base, or cheesing an expo. So if they double base right at the beginning of the game, dropping some grunts in to take out the keep. I think it's called keep. outpost. That's what the very first Covenant base is called. As you can see, they're really not built for general combat, so their plasma pistols do very minimal damage. One of the reasons that they're so terrifying is the fact that once they get some upgrades on there, they just deal massive amounts of splash damage, and if you've got a lot of them, they can easily take down a base within seconds. Really, the only way you can stop something like this is to just keep engineers around your friendly bases. Double up on some shields maybe, but it's pretty effective. Also, the fact that the Arbiter can stealth means he can do that over and over again, and it's really hard to track him where he's going to be, and he'll just sneakily drop tons of grunts on you. 2 upgrades for the grunts. The first is Zeal, makes their suicide attack move a lot faster, very helpful. Second is Defile, which overall increases the splash damage and the effectiveness of their explosion. Another cool little thing that I was messing around with when I was filming for them, if you press the X button right before they're about to smash into a building, only some of the grunts will actually explode. So I was thinking, what if you took advantage of that and had some engineers with you and just had like an infinite amount of explosions, which, I mean, it does work. I've never seen this strategy before. Maybe it'll work on some online noobs, we'll see. The grunts are also a very glitchy unit. When you port them through the teleporter and they're with the Arbiter, a lot of the times their explosion attack, their suicide attack, just won't work. You'll press Y on a building or whatever button you press, and they won't do it. So to fix that, press local units and then press the ability. That should fix the majority of the issues, but just keep that in mind. Their main competitive use is as a rush unit. Also, they do have hook control capabilities. However, most players are going to use the suicide grunts to try and cripple their opponent's economy by smashing them into heavy supply paths. A 160 value suicide grunt is definitely worth taking out. Supply pad that you paid $100 for, and then you spend another $225 in order to upgrade it. And on top of that, they're losing that income that would produce. So it's a good trade. Remember when I said that the suicide grunt was the last unique unit? Well, I lied. The chopper is our final unique unit of the game, exclusive to the Chieftain, and boy does it suck. Primarily used to gather crates and scout around, explore the map, etc. This scout unit has the highest health of any scout unit in the game, and it can take quite a pounding. So it's very heavily armored, however, it's a terrible fighting unit. Let's go into the upgrades and I'll explain here. The autocannons upgrade adds the 2 side cannons to the chopper, allows it to shoot at air and attack, ground targets as well. Stabilizers then will improve the accuracy of those cannons and the damage. And lastly, the ramming targe gives the chopper a nice health upgrade and improves the ram's ability to smash into people. I don't see a real reason to build them at all. If you're thinking about using them for scouting purposes, sure, use the one that you get at the beginning of the game, but don't build any more. A Banshee costs the same amount, and also it can scout a lot faster. And on top of that, I simply believe that they just don't do enough damage. They're kind of clunky to move around, and as you can see, they have to kind of line themselves up to even shoot at things. Unless they're pursuing something, they can fire and move at the same time, but unlike Warthogs or Goats, they can't really strafe and shoot at the same time. Their ram is pretty useful, though. I'd say it's the best ram in the game. It doesn't self-damage them as much as the Ghost or the Warthog would, and it's really effective with the lift camping strategy. If you're getting rushed, if you park your chopper at the enemy lift, good way to get some good damage done on porting units. Also, if you're rushing, the Chieftain's usually going to drop the chopper in alongside of his brutes, just to help fight things like flamethrowers and soak up some extra damage from Warthogs and such. And this is their base damage too when they're firsting an enemy player. You can see also they're fully upgraded, and there's like 7 of them too. They just take forever to get anything done. So I really didn't think too highly about the Ghost until kind of recently when I started messing around with them. They have surprisingly a good amount of strategies and are a halfway decent unit. They are the cheapest, quickest, and most easily produced scout unit in the game. Building them in 1v1s straight off the bat, say going like a factory first, can really help lock down those maps and gain control of the hooks and the crates that are around. 3 total upgrades for the Ghost. First, boosted ram allows them to ram targets like the Warthog or the Chopper. Also gives them a nice health and damage boost. Definitely pick that up. Strafe allows them to dodge certain attacks, kind of like the shaft pod for the Hornet, where it will occasionally dodge incoming missiles or like a Cobra shot or a tank shot, canister shell. Final upgrade is the Scout Shield. Doesn't actually improve the damage of the Ghost, but it gives them a nice health buff with that big shield. Also, because you have to upgrade to Gunner on the Warthog, if you can get a lot of Ghosts out, you can put a lot of early damage on those unupgraded Warthogs that your opponent's making. I kind of compare them to like the Zergling from StarCraft, where they're just super cheap, super inexpensive, and you just spam them out. They don't have really any health to take a lot of hits, so Warthogs will definitely beat them in an encounter if there's a lot of them, and you know, grenades from Marines or tanks obviously will just smash them. Once you get out of the early game, the Ghosts really start to fall off like a cliff in terms of effectiveness, so don't build them past the early stages of the game or in like a rushing scenario. Oh, and one more thing about the Ghost is they do a good amount of damage towards unupgraded air units like Tier 1 Banshee, Vampire, Hornet, for example. They're really good in those massive numbers. Wraiths are the trusty steed of the Prophet. Such a great all-around battle tank. Very tanky unit. Can take lots of punishment, lots of damage. Their shields in the right hands are forces to be reckoned with. If the proper player is, say, microing their Wraiths properly, you're not going to kill any of them. So take the weak Wraiths, the weak shields, send them to the back of the army, push the fresh ones forward, rinse and repeat, wait till those shields recharge. Tons and tons of lifespan out of them. Wraiths are a very good 1v1 unit. If you can get the proper tech on them fast enough, they're a lot cheaper than Scorpion tanks, so you have the potential to overwhelm the Scorpion tanks. Also, they're a Tech 1 unit, so you can have a factory up pretty quickly and start producing tons of Wraiths. They're not without their drawbacks, however, which is why they're not like godlike. They suck against air units, of course. Hunters will clean them up. Cobras. Scorpions that are highly upgraded do good work. Also, one of my favorite counters to Wraiths is Spartans. So hijacking the Covenant Wraiths, and that can really quickly spin the odds in the opponent's favor. Heavy Shield is a wonderful upgrade for the Wraith. Gives it tons more health. Also is a great way to counter enemy Warthogs like Gunner Hogs and Grenadier Hogs to some extent. It just takes them a really long time to kill the Wraiths when they don't have Gauss. So it's a great way to throw some more defense on your army. Next up we have Scorch, which is the special ability for the Wraith. It fires a area of effect plasma mortar that sort of lingers on its target and deals some burning damage, which is really good against infantry and structures also. So similar to the Wolverine, the Scorpion tank and also the Wraith can use their Y abilities or their special abilities at different ranges. You see here how this is below the terrain and they can still hit upwards on enemy buildings. You could do this over certain impassable terrain and other chasms. Scorch is really good for hit and run strats, where you're just running past the enemy base and you hit special onto like a few supply pads. Great for weakening those or taking down some of their eco. Final upgrade is just plain and simple. Simply increases the damage of the cannon, which, you know, who doesn't love that, right? So to sum up, I'd say that they're definitely a better ones unit than a teams unit. In teams, Covenant are usually dominating the air, just because late game UNSC vehicles like Scorpions will for sure beat Wraiths in a one-on-one confrontation. So yeah, they've got their uses, and yeah, just make sure you don't get hijacked. One of my more favorite units, the Locust, is an anti-structure walking little mech crab type unit. It has one of the longest ranges in the game and has a continual beam attack that it fires. Overall, the Locust is an average unit. It dishes out a great amount of damage, but on the flippity flip side, it's super frail and can be killed pretty much by anything. Doesn't have to be like an anti-vehicle. You always want to space your Locusts out if you're ever going to be building them, because attacks like a Mac Blast or a Carpet Bomb they can take out easily, 3 or more Locusts if they're all clumped up together, so you never want to make that effective for them. Most Locusts are built in the early mid-game to try and, say, cheese a base or get off some sneaky sort of rush style, like a Tech 2 rush. That's where I see most of the Locusts go. Also, you can do the same thing on a 1v1. You definitely want to bring some protection with your Locusts, just in case, they try to fight back, which in most cases they will. I mean, they don't really just lie down and take it, but they're just keep in mind how weak they are. Use their range to your advantage. Like I said, they have one of the longest in the game, so if you maybe throw 1 Locust or 2 in the back, can't hurt. Will help you kill that base a lot faster for sure. Their very first upgrade, the Overdrive, will siphon their shield in order to deal additional damage. This will also give them a slight boost to the range as well, just a little bit, but it's pretty effective, as it can go up exponentially the longer you are striking that target. And their second upgrade simply makes their shield recharge faster. This does stack also with the Shield of the Forerunner upgrade in the Temple, which makes the shields recharge faster for all Covenant units. You'll see here that the normal beam will not actually strike through the high ground. However, if we use Overdrive, that will penetrate the dirt and actually hit those buildings, kind of like the Scorch ability or the Canister Shell. This is a real game example here. Right on the Rings of Exile, you can make great use of this little strat and just overdrive enemy buildings that are down below. Don't expect Locust to win many engagements. Maybe some weak units like a group of Warthogs or Marines will do alright, but if you're trying to go up against tanks, not going to happen. Air units, forget it. One more drawback to Locusts is that they have to be stationary while they're firing, so that does leave them vulnerable to a lot of attacks, you might imagine. So yeah, if you can get Locusts out early, that's when they're the most effective. That's when they're the best. When your enemy can put up the least amount of resistance, and you can just start cheesing their bases. Oh, here she comes. The thickest boy of all the Covenant units, the meaner older brother to the Locust, the Scarab. Unlike the UNSC Uber unit, the Scarab is actually a halfway decent Uber unit. If you can get them out on the field, they will do some good work for you. They'll soak up a lot of damage, and they will put out quite a lot of damage as well. They are the only land unit that can scale certain types of impassable terrain, which can make them untouchable from other ground units while they target bases or enemy armies. What you need to understand about the Scarab, and this goes for a lot of new players as well, it's not the be-all, end-all unit of this game. I see players fall under the illusion that this one Scarab will take out an entire army of power turret tanks or an entire army of sacrifice Banshees, when that's just not the case. Concentrated fire will take down a Scarab very easily, and that's not even considering if you add in like a cryo bomb or a quad Mac blast. Also, Scarabs are just really expensive too. You have to get to Covenant Tech 3, which is already 2,000 resources, and then on top of that you have to spend another 3,000 just to purchase a Scarab, and it takes, I think it's about a minute and a half, 2 minutes to even produce. So that was all the negatives of the Scarab. Let's talk about what the Scarab does right. Like I said earlier, the Scarab can climb up onto these large impassable terrain, making it impossible for ground units to even shoot up at them. That's why they're so deadly on a lot of the 3v3 maps, like this one, Frozen Valley, and the other one, Glacial Ravine, is the Scarabs have so much room to actually do those cheesy strats where you can just position them on a cliff and they can't take any damage. And the best way to deal with them in that situation is to have a massive army of air units or a bunch of leader powers going off at the same time, like a cryo Mac blast or a Prophet beaming it down, that sort of thing. And if you manage to get a star or even 2 stars on your Scarab, oh man, that's gonna just annihilate people. So the Scarab, used in the right circumstances, can be a really powerful tool. If we're looking at it from a competitive standpoint, like in a very high level match with really good players, I'm going to say a good 80% of the time nobody's really building Scarabs ever. They're mostly created in like a super turtle situation where players are just kind of messing around, they want to have fun, but they're just not a competitive unit, because a full army of tanks will definitely squash a Scarab. You're more than likely going to be attacked before your Scarab's even ready, unless you're doing some sort of double forge rush on like Exile, where you can easily get a Scarab out in about 5 minutes or so. Lastly, the Scarabs do not have any sort of upgrades, unlike the Vulture. They do have one final evolution that makes them quite unstoppable, should I say. I told you there was one more unofficial super unit in the game. It is the Jesus Scarab, or El Escarabajo de Jesus. It is a very powerful unit. Simply, all you have to do to make this is just have one Scarab, and the rest of your population is just fully upgraded engineers. Super hard to stop, because these suckers will just out-heal any damage that is done to you. So if you're going up against a Jesus Scarab, you better make sure you have a lot of vampires so you can stun those pesky engineers, or a cryo bomb for that matter, so you can attack the Scarab without being out-healed. But you better hope to God that you kill it, because if you don't, you're going to have no army, and you're going to have more than likely a 1-star Scarab to deal with, and at that point it's pretty much it's done. Unless you're just being turtled by them, you're more than likely going to get steamrolled. So moral of the story, just make sure you attack the engineers first. Shoot at them with your tank guns or like your ODSTs. Just make sure that they're not actually healing that Scarab. First up on the list, we've got Donkey Kong, aka the Brute Chieftain. I have a few things I want to talk about before we get into the leaders. First of all, there are no stats available for any of the Covenant leaders in terms of health or damage and what their upgrades affect them, so I won't be really showing you any numbers on that. Also, I really wasn't trying to rank the leaders per se, more so the actual unit itself. The leaders in Halo Wars, you know, like who's the best, who's the worst, that's a whole video on its own. Here, just take it at face value that I'm talking about the actual unit itself, how it does in combat, how effective it is, that sort of thing. It's a little trickier to do with Covenant because the leaders are basically their gimmick. That is their their viability when it comes to matchups. So let's get into it. The Brute, super strong, has a gravity hammer and also the vortex ability. The gravity hammer can be upgraded to add stuns, so great for taking out tanks. Vortex can pull in enemy air units or enemy infantries and do just lots of damage. First upgrade for the Chieftain. Inheritance will stun an individual target, except leaders and except Scarabs. Scarabs only are slowed for a moment, and that will hold them in place until the unit's dead, or you say airdrop it away with a Pelican. The second upgrade, Birthright, can actually pull units to the Chieftain, so he doesn't have to run up to him and smash him with the hammer. It's very, very useful and great for pulling tanks towards you or other large units, enemy infantry, Spartans, that sort of thing. And then you begin to stun them in place and have your army melt whatever it is. Only unit that can't be pulled is the Scarab. It can pull anything else though, even an elephant. The last upgrade, Destiny, can pull multiple infantries towards you at once instead of just a single unit. And it stuns multiple infantries at the same time. Also keep in mind that the leaders have two sets of upgrades, one for their base stats and their regular attack, and the second for their leader power. All of the regular attack upgrades, of course, improves their damage and improves their health across the board for every leader. The Brute's special ability is the Vortex, which will suck in enemy units, enemy buildings, debris into a giant vortex, and you can then explode it for a big area of effect blast. Each of the upgrades just improves the size of that vortex and how many units you can pull into it. Now, what do I think about Brute? I think that he is one of the most aggressive leaders in the game. Probably one of the strongest 1v1 units in the game as well. The fact that he can pull in anything he really needs. He's got a massive amount of health. He has a very fast walking speed, so he can get to places pretty quickly. And, of course, the infamous Brute Rush, where you just walk your Chieftain to the enemy base and then just port in a bunch of Brutes. One of his downsides is he cannot fight air units unless he's vortexing, so that's something that he struggles with. And let's say he gets disruption bombed as well, there's nothing he can do. And air units can kite around him pretty easily, so that's one of the places he blunders in. The Chieftain does do a good amount of damage against Warthogs too with his Vortex. If you get them in like a choke point area, you can rank up a lot of kills pretty quickly. However, once they get a little more upgraded, like to Gosshogs, it's a lot harder to deal with. Also in the 1v1s, he's really good at taking control of the hooks early on. He can just walk anywhere, drop a Brute squad in there and be on his way. I think that's very effective. However, in the team modes, I think there is one leader that is a little bit better than him. The Blade of the Prophet, the Arbiter, also known as Ripa Morame, but his birth name was Shirley, and everybody knows it's Shirley because it says so in the toolbar of Halo Wars. Now that you know the truth, let me tell you a little bit about Shirley. He is quite the fighter, this one here. He wields 2 energy swords and has the unique ability to tap into his gamer rage and slice many targets and lock onto them and deal massive amounts of damage. Arbiter's first upgrade will increase his health, his damage, and also give him a unique reflect ability that any units targeting him will deal damage to themselves also. Second upgrade is pretty similar to the first, another health and damage upgrade. He also deals more reflective damage as well. Similar to the Honor Guard, the Arbiter's final upgrade gives him a permanent cloak, which is really helpful in a lot of late game situations. His first upgrade for his rage, probably his most important, is the ability to self-heal every time he performs a kill in the rage mode. Coupled with his speed and the ability to self-heal, This is the reason that I think the Arbiter is the king of the Covenant when it comes to team games like 2v2, 3v3. If you don't have a disruption bomb to stop the rage, a good Arbiter will just annihilate most of your army, especially if they have a lot of upgrades on them. It makes it really difficult to deal with. Also, the Arbiter is one of the best methods for taking down mass Warthogs. If you can avoid the disruption bombs, it's like a one-hit kill if your Arbiter's strong enough, and it can really be effective. It's not uncommon, too, for games to just simply consist of an Arbiter only using his Arbiter, just not building anything else and just raging all the units on the map. It is not recommended, but if you're good enough, it can definitely work. Also, there is a rage glitch, which I am failing miserably here. It's a lot harder to do on the PC, but you can see this little chicken walk is another useful trick that you can use to make your raging more effective. Check out my tips and tricks video if you want to learn how to do it. His second rage upgrade will make his rage cheaper to use, and the last one was very, very strong. It will buff friendly units nearby and cause them to do more damage. You can tell that the buff is in effect because the unit will have a glowing red field around it. I also think that the Arbiter is a very, very strong, maybe the strongest rush defense tool in the game. He can slice up enemy infantries pretty easily, he can attack Warthogs with ease, and yeah, he can get some suicide grunts as well to help, get these Covenant leaders off of your base and just nuke them. Plus, once the rush is over, you can simply just transition to offense and go attack the enemy base and try to take down their pads with like a suicide grunt counter rush. Similar to the Chieftain, the Arbiter really does not do good against air units, and he has a very, very important glitch you have to understand. That if he rages an air unit over impassable terrain, like let's say they're hanging up over a mountain, that sort of thing, Arbiter will just simply die. So it's very important that you know exactly what's going on and you make sure they're not trying to gimp your Arbiter. Lastly, the disruption bomb is where Arbiters go to die. The canister shell tank, power turret tank, if you all gang up on an Arbiter, it's very easy to just blast him away all at the same time, especially because you can't recall him or try to extract him anyway. Lastly, why I don't think he does as well in ones, he's a lot weaker than the Chieftain, and it's really easy early on in the game to kill him with like a big group of flamers or a bunch of Warthog rams if you catch him at the right time. That also, the suicide grunt is definitely not as strong as the brute squad in terms of like controlling the resource hooks or the bonus reactors. This is the moment we've all been waiting for, the climax of the video, the pinnacle, the most alpha unit in this entire game, the Prophet of Regret. He is bound to a wheelchair due to a few medical reasons, mainly being one of his appendages is very heavy to carry, so he has to be assisted. Sort of like Stephen Hawking, he can fire lasers out of his wheelchair and also call down lasers from space. This can leave him vulnerable to attack at times, so if you think you can take him down, definitely strike him while he's doing the beam attack. You can also pimp out his wheelchair with some new drip. It's very important that you do that, otherwise his shield will not hold up to many attacks. The first upgrade changes his little plasma cannons to the green fuel rod cannons that deal more damage. The second upgrade adds two protectors that follow him around and deal additional DPS. The final upgrade has our Holy Prophet take to the heavens and ascend into the sky with a flying wheelchair. This improves the damage that he does and also makes for some really crazy unit drop strategies. Because he can fly behind enemy lines, he can do some really long distance hot drops. This makes him a very great late game unit because he can fly over to an enemy base, start beaming some buildings down. The beam also has its upgrades, which each one will improve the size of the beam and also the damage dealt. Really big drawback of the Flying Prophet is it only takes one vampire to stun him in place, and he can't move at all. Only thing he can do is hit the recall and go back to his base. So a deadly combo, Disruption Bomb, and a vampire, he's pretty much dead at that point. Now, as many of you longtime viewers know, I'm a huge fan of the Prophet. I was forced to play as him due to Random All selecting him for me lots and lots of times. And my opinion on him has definitely changed. I used to be a big Prophet hater, as they say, Prophet denier. But I've learned what he does well, what he doesn't. I'd say early on in the game is his weakest point when he doesn't have any upgrades, and it can be a struggle for him to fight things like Warthogs or tanks. Prophet is very good at holding back Covenant rushes. His honor guards do great damage to the leaders, and then he can use his fuel rod guns to attack any Warthogs. He's also not that half bad on offense either. If you can get a Prophet onto an enemy Covenant base, honor guards are just going to whack away at those buildings and dish out tons of early damage to the leaders. The unfortunate part, though, is the Prophet alone is not going to take out an army of Gosshogs or stun a bunch of tanks like the Brute Chieftain can, or how the Arbiter can rage a bunch of units. He's weak in that aspect. He can be overwhelmed by lots of enemy forces. I think where Prophet is the best is for sure the late game, where he can get all of the upgrades on all of his units, and he can simply bring his army anywhere that he can fly. This makes units like Hunters, Wraiths, Locusts a lot more effective, because those units are typically pretty slow, and that's one reason why they're not used that often, is because they can't really get to where they're going, but you just bring them right on over. Another drawback to the Prophet is his honor guard. Although it can take the garrisons, they cannot defend themselves inside the garrisons, which makes for easy pickings for like a Flamer or Warthog to come up and take you right out of there. On the flip side, though, he can clear the rebels pretty easily, so that's a bonus there. And the moment in my career that really made me a Prophet believer was taking down a Scarab with a Tech 2 Prophet. It can be done, folks. You just gotta really believe in yourself and push the limits. It's also a good example of how the beam is most effective. It is best used against slower stationary targets like bases, tanks, groups of infantry, that sort of thing. This is the Sentinel. It is the first of a very limited amount of Forerunner units that actually made their way into the final game. As it currently stands, there are no 1v1 maps that have any Forerunner units at all, so they're not ranked in that category. But let's talk about the Sentinel. There's not much to say. It is a tier 1 flying unit, so that's something. It costs 100 resources and is produced from the Sentinel factory. There are only 2 maps that have Sentinel factories on them, one being the 2v2 map Repository, and the second being the 3v3 map Glacial Ravine. I believe they are almost next to useless unit. They do very little damage, they move very slowly. If you have a lot of numbers, I mean, maybe you can do something with them, but it's just never done. They're just so weak that they don't really hold up to much of any kind of damage. The only time that I would ever really build a Sentinel, and I can be pretty specific because there's only 2 maps that they come on. So on Glacial Ravine, if say somebody has the walls taken, because there's laser walls in the center, use them as a scout unit. You know, they're a really cheap scout unit. You can fly them over the mountain pass and kind of inspect enemy bases and see if you can find anything. That's really it. I mean, I don't know what else to say about them. They're just kind of there. They're cool though. Big Boss Daddy Sentinel is actually kind of decent. Also produced from the Sentinel factory, it is a Tech 2 flying unit that has a completely unique mechanic to only the Super Sentinel. Its ray that it fires will slow enemy targets. It doesn't stun them like the Brute Chieftain, but it will slow them and prevent them from issuing an attack. This makes games on Repository and Glacial Ravine very unique and a lot different than the normal meta. These Super Sentinels have the ability to kind of act like a gremlin in a way and stun enemy vehicles, enemy infantry. I don't think it stuns heroes, but it's really kind of interesting. They are a lot beefier than the normal Sentinels, and this clip kind of shows off their stun in action, where they're the most useful tank matchups for sure, helping your teammates stun the enemy tanks. They'll get less damage output, and you'll put some air pressure onto them. And once you get a lot of them together, that's when it really starts to be a problem for the other team. Now, why aren't they ranked higher than C, you might ask? Just because that's really all they can do. Their damage isn't very good, but they can stun enemy units. They can't fight air units, but they do okay. They get a passing grade. Alright, so you guys ready to get in some weird shit? Because we're about to talk about the three amigos. These are the Protectors Sentinels, only available on one single map. I'd say the most broken map in the entire game. That is the 2v2 map Labyrinth. If this guy is familiar to you, well, then good memory, because this is what the Prophet's second upgrade adds to his wheelchair. He gets two of these little things, and they shoot laser beams, and they're very, very annoying to deal with on this map. Let me show you why. So, what you can do on this map Labyrinth, you can immediately send your scout over to the little Sentinel factory on the sides. Then you can buy the shield protector to shield your scout, and it will take the damage from the I call them the rebel sentinels, the NPC sentinels. Once that's done, you can start building the offensive protectors and immediately fly them over to the enemy base. This is how you play this map. If you don't do this, someone better than you probably will, and they'll use it to keep down your supply pads or take out your scout hogs. Because it's such a quick attack, you can really cripple somebody by doing this. Don't feel discouraged though. If you really don't know how to deal with it, you can just do cross turrets, so one turret on each corner should help, or go reactor first to get your Warthog gunner, or get your temple out first to get your leader to come and help with the protectors. Another thing about the sentinels here is that you can attach them to one of your units. So that way, the only way they can be killed is if you kill the unit it's attached to, or if you cryo bomb the sentinel. And on this map too, there's two protector factories, which means if the enemy team beats you to it, they could possibly be doing this to both of your bases. So yeah, it's kind of broken, and I'm honestly glad that these sentinels aren't on more maps. I think it would really change up the way the whole game's played. And if somehow your opponent survives the sentinel push and you still have a lot of them left, you can just attach them to other units, rush back in there, and now they got to deal with the sentinels and some of your units like a brute squad or a arbiter. It's a lot of DPS to deal with. The healing protector is kind of how it sounds, just heals things. You can attach it to a single unit and it will heal it when it's not in combat. I mean, that's basically it. There's not much else to really talk about. It's not as good as the other two, that's for sure, because it has less strategic value, you could say. It only heals that one unit, and it stays on there forever. So you, if you want that unit to be healed, I mean, you could throw it on a leader. That's probably the best use for it. Or like a Scarab. I don't know when you'd be building a Scarab on Labyrinth, but you get the idea. We have made it to the final unit in the Halo Wars multiplayer. And before we get started, I just want to thank each and every one of you that have made it this far into the video. You're all true fans, and I am so grateful to have people that support this game still and just really love to learn about it and are willing to sit through almost a 2-hour video going in detail about each of the units. Thank you for giving me the time, and I hope I made this enjoyable. So let's get into this little bastard here and go over the shield protector. So if you thought Warthogs were strong, have you ever thought about putting a shield on one? Because it's a nightmare. Warthogs already do enough damage as it is. Putting a shield over them, allowing you to come in for a hit and run, and then all their shields get depleted from enemy damage. Then you swing out, swing back in, rinse and repeat. It's very, very effective. Now I know what you're thinking. Yes, you can add a double bubble to the Prophet. You can put the shield right on him there. So he has two, because why not? Makes him a lot more stronger. And if you thought that was wild, look at Spartan tanks. Put a shield on a Spartan, and then put a shield on a tank, and then just have them combine. You get even more monstrosity. That's why I was mentioning earlier on, I'm kind of glad that this wasn't on any other maps, because this would be what the meta would revolve around. That's what I think anyways. I don't know for sure, but it's gotten way out of control on this map. Nobody likes to play it anymore. So yeah, best way to deal with the Sentinels in my experience is just don't play Labyrinth. Saves everybody a lot of time. So just about time to wrap this video up. We've seen some shit. We have learned some things. Heck, I've learned a lot of things. But I'll leave you with this. Thank you guys so much for your support. Let's keep this game alive as long as possible. Thanks again. This is your boy Turnip. I'll catch you next time. Peace. Okay, are they gone? Thank God. Alright, so the Prophet of Regret, everyone, he's actually S tier. I just had to let the normal plebs leave before I could explain that. I did not want this game to be broken. Once we have everybody picking Prophet, there's really nothing we can do. It just turns into an all-out madhouse. So, Prophet is the actual best character in this game. Just keep that on the DL between you and me, alright?